Okay, we are in. Perfect. Awesome. Hello, everyone. We're just going to take about 1 to 2 minutes. We're just going to wait for, there's still a few folks still joining. So welcome. Just hang tight just a little bit and we'll get things started.
Yeah, hey guys, we're just waiting for the last few stragglers to get into the presentation. So hopefully you can hear me. I'm chatting right now. Good to see some familiar names in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Looking at everyone registered, I think we can get things started here right now. So before we get started, I just want to make sure, just via chat, can everybody hear me? Maybe a thumbs up or something in the chat there. Awesome. Perfect. Good, good, good. That's excellent, excellent. Perfect. So welcome everyone. Good afternoon, good morning for some, right? And I hope everyone is able to join this live storm with ease. So just to introduce myself, my name is Alvin. I will be the moderator for today. Thank you all for attending this webinar to have a conversation about user experience and security with Citrix Cloud. So before we begin, just want to give everyone a heads up, and if you haven't noticed already right now, all of you are on mute. It will be muted to the full course of this webinar, and so we want to keep the chat as active as possible as well. So any questions, anything that you will have, we will have a Q&A session at the very end. So please put your questions via chat. It should be in the bottom right-hand corner. So any of your questions you have at the very end, I'll answer those questions to Terry, who will be hosting and presenting this webinar as well. And for the essence of time and respecting everyone's time here as well, we will do our best to answer all the questions that's been given. So to get started here, I would like you all, I would like to introduce to you all Terry Rebstein, who is going to have an amazing discussion about Citrix. So just a little bit about Terry. He is our enterprise solution architect. 18 years in the IT space, 16 years of that doing the Citrix solutions. He's worked with so many different organizations, financial, forestry, Crown Corps, retail, and so much more. Um, Terry comes a strong background with VDI, virtualization, cloud computing, and so many other supporting technologies for us as well. And outside his passion with IT, you know, Terry's from out west, so no surprise, you know, avid skier, snowboarder, mountain biker, and from above all of that, a fantastic father with two fantastic children as well. So enough of me rambling on here. I will pass the virtual mic to Terry, and Terry, they're all
Perfect.
yours.
Thanks so much, Alvin, for the introduction. So yeah, I guess let's kick it off just to get started. We've got fancy poll technology in our Livestorm app here. So we kind of would be curious if you guys could give us a bit of feedback in terms of your organization and how sort of how much has it embraced this remote work scenario that we've been seeing. And so if you just take a minute to maybe throw the answers in there, we can have a quick look. Um, and then it might be interesting also for all the attendees to kind of see where different organizations are at. And the answers are trickling in. Frequent hybrid work seems to be the front runner, which is kind of what we would expect. It's the maybe a 15%, 16% fully remote, and then yeah, just only 5% full office work. So maybe we'll carry on. But yeah, that's kind of what I would expect is that we now are in a new world, right? The world of work has changed. It's not something that organizations basically kind of did as a nice to have for their employees. We're obviously in the new world of COVID-19. Hybrid work is here to stay for most organizations. People are expecting that. People are basically demanding that if it doesn't exist. There's obviously a shift also with IT modernization where organizations are starting to move to, or potentially have moved heavily to SaaS applications, applications that exist in the browser. They're still having to maintain those other applications that might be traditionally deployed, client server applications. There's a whole mix going on, and the organizations have to maintain that. And frequently, we're getting that sort of users are demanding the same experience they have from their applications that they use at home, right? Or people are used to their easy to use applications that they leverage in their day-to-day lives, and they expect the business applications to be no different in terms of how easy and how convenient it is to use those. So that all of these place demands on the organization. And then on top of that, security is obviously paramount. As we start to leverage these different types of applications and ways of working, we got to make sure that the wrapper is in place, that it's all done securely. You can't make something easy and flexible for your users to leverage, but then have a huge gaping hole from a security aspect. Obviously, companies have policies around compliance. Maybe there's auditor requirements, privacy requirements, and that always becomes a balancing act. We saw the little teeter totter on the title page. It's always that balance of experience for the user compared against the security. And so, really, what we're looking for is a solution that can bring the best of both worlds. And so, desktop delivery is typically where users are doing a lot of their work today, although that's shifting in terms of not being necessarily what a desktop that you and I might have thought of 10 years ago. So in the past, it was a physical desktop. IT used to have frequent touch points. Maybe they managed them manually and had to maintain applications on that. But people started to see that that was challenging. So then there was a pivot to sort of leveraging VDI where you could centralize all of this. You could put sort of security controls around. You can have that gold image master and maintain sort of in a one-to-many use case. And now that's even evolving further. And obviously in the cloud sort of first world, we're starting to see the shift to desktop as a service. And so really this is taking some of the benefits of VDI, but simplifying it and making it infinitely more scalable because you're not necessarily tied to what exact resources you have in your data center, but really giving the organizations a lot of flexibility. And so along those lines, Citrix is shifting as well. They've recognized the need of organizations and they've adapted their solutions to meet these requirements. And so basically, Citrix has introduced a product called Desktop as a Service. That's what DaaS stands for. It's basically the successor to what they would have called virtual apps and desktops. Or for those of you going back a bit, it was Zen Apps and Desktop, and then even before that, Presentation Server, Metaframe. But Citrix has been playing in this field for a long time, and they're very, very good at understanding what an organization needs to do in terms of providing that good user experience, but also what the IT organizations need to do in terms of streamlining management and being able to handle some of these new use cases that are being developed. And so Citrix has made this shift to leading with DaaS as their front runner. And so how does that really benefit, like, for those organizations wondering, like, what does it bring to my organization? And so Citrix with DaaS has shifted a lot of the infrastructure and the management into a cloud service. So what that means is organizations no longer have to worry about maintaining the infrastructure or patching or version upgrades or trying to get to that new version so that they can basically leverage a new feature. All of that now is handled as the Citrix DaaS service. And so that provides a consistent user experience. A single portal is available now as a part of the cloud platform, all the automatic updates and integration that we talked about. And what that lets organizations do is really focus on the things that matter. So these are the workloads, their their data repositories, their intellectual property. It lets IT not have to worry about the things they don't want to spend time thinking about, and really focus on the parts that make up what their value is to their customers or their organization. And when they get to focus on their workloads and data, it lets them enable sort of better compliance and security, because it really sort of lets them not have to worry about the pieces that are just routine maintenance. And so before we get too far into it, I think maybe let's do a quick demo. So an organization, or for those of you who maybe never seen Citrix Cloud, or maybe VDI might even be new for you, let's talk a little bit about that. This is the Quadbridge one where it's all branded, but what we'll be doing is just taking a look today at the Citrix, the Citrix demo environment. And so let me maximize this. Oh, we still got people signing up. So this is the Citrix workspace. So it's a unified portal where a user can come in. They can see all their applications and desktops that have been assigned to them based on role in the organization. So they don't necessarily need to see things that they don't want to use. Potentially, they might actually have more apps available than they even use on a day-to-day. So they can favorite these things. They can basically pick and choose what their day-to-day applications are. And all of this is based on AD group membership and granular controls so that the IT organization can limit access to just what they need to do. So most of you guys would probably be familiar in the VDI world. There's a typical virtual desktop. So this is targeted at that user who basically works all day in the corporate resources. Maybe they might use this on premise. There's nothing to say that VDI has to be a remote access solution. In fact, pretend I worked on my desktop all day today, and then I got a call, my kid was sick, I had to rush home. I basically could disconnect at work, run home, jump on my workspace or my laptop at home and connect in. And so what we'll see here as it connects, basically it takes me right back into that desktop environment that has all my applications and all my use cases that I need to do. And so this is traditional VDI. Some of the things that are really cool with what VDI is, where VDI is at today, is that you workflows that might have required GPU capability or advanced performance. All of this is now supported in VDI through GPU virtualization. So there's really no use cases that can't really be met by the VDI solution. Maybe there's scenarios now where we talk about SaaS applications. So for example, you might have an intranet site that's internal, not published externally. Traditionally, you would need some kind of gateway, or you need some kind of proxy. You might have some other solution. But with Citrix Cloud, you can effectively enable an intranet site, make it available through that same portal, and you can see what happens is the URL is never exposed, and it will load up here in a second. Demos always go slower when it's actually live. And so you can see I'm actually accessing an intranet location completely without launching a Citrix session. For those of you who notice, there's no ICA launch, there's no client. This is basically proxied through secure private access. And the nice thing with this is, for example, say this was a corporate HR application that was really secure. What we can actually do is have IT set some security parameters and boundaries. And what you'll see here is this actually launches in a browser as an embedded application within my browser. Again, I don't need the Citrix client or anything like that, but this is going to deliver that in secure corporate application. But you'll see it will look a little bit different when it comes up here. And Citrix basically allows IT to set all these controls in a very easy fashion. And so as it pops up here, you'll see now that I've got watermarks, and Citrix can basically control that, where I say, hey, this application's secure. I don't want to allow clipboard. I don't want to allow maybe downloads or uploads. So even typical or SaaS applications that might have been challenging for an organization to secure can be controlled with the same security parameters that Citrix brings to their traditional VDI and published applications. So all of this is made possible through this sort of unified portal, and it can be tied to your Azure Active Directory or Okta or whatever authentication you want to use. And then sort of beyond the scope of today, but you can do adaptive authentication to make applications be available or security controls available based on the security posture of the user. Definitely, we can talk more about this later, or if you guys want to do a demo one-on-one. But I just wanted to give you guys an idea of what the Citrix Workspace looks like and how it unifies all those traditional applications with VDI, with SaaS applications, all with the same kind of security boundaries. So we'll jump back to the presentation. And so the, the the solution that makes this possible is the client that makes this possible is the Citrix Workspace app. This is the Citrix client, and you can see from the array of logos on the screen that they have sort of always said any device, anywhere. They support Windows or Android or Linux or Apple. And the beautiful thing is it's the same experience regardless of the sort of client that you're on. It's that sign in once, get to access to all your resources, and you can easily move and shift from one sort of client to the next. So potentially I use my Windows PC at work, but then I can go home and use my Mac at night and have the exact same user experience with those same security controls. So Citrix prides itself on its HDX technologies, and really this is what separates it from some of the sort of other competitors in terms of the protocol and the ability for Citrix to give that paramount user experience. So whether it's rich multimedia, users doing YouTube application, YouTube is like a lot of people laugh when I say YouTube is a critical business app, but a lot of training these days are delivered from YouTube, or people are doing unified communications with full multimedia 4K video, or like we saw with the Google Earth example, they need GPU capability. Citrix lets you not sort of pigeonhole your users and say, oh, well, we can't really do that. Maybe you should use your local browser if you need to do that. Really, it gives that unified, easy to use experience with sort of the technology that it layers on over its protocol. So we'll jump into the next one. So we got a little bit more of a follow-on poll quickly. For those of you who are doing remote access or enabling your organization to work remotely, what is the primary method of allowing those users to connect? So we got that in the poll. I think you might just have to scroll down. I don't know if we can get that to pop up for the there we go. So let's just take a quick look. Okay, interesting. So I'd say definitely the bulk of the users are doing VPN. So VPN is one of the challenges for organizations. There's sort of two main concerns that I see with VPN. One of them, it's a security hole, potentially opening network access that you're extending to that user's device on the endpoint. So if you're letting a user use a home PC, you're now putting a home PC on your network effectively. And the other challenge I see with VPN is that users or IT organizations often forget that a lot of these client server applications where the data resides in the data center, they're not designed to basically have the application work remotely over a VPN where there might be 50 or 100 milliseconds of latency, where VDI and Citrix approach comes in is it's designed to do the long walking or like the travel, and so it lets your data and your client application reside beside each other, so you still have that LAN type experience, but the VDI technology is what does the remoting, and that's designed to do the traveling over those 50 or 100 millisecond links. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So Citrix Desktop as a Service, what is it? For those of you maybe who are running Citrix today or another VDI platform, what is it? Or for those of you who are new, what exactly does it bring? How does it leverage this good user experience and the security, and what else can it do for us? So in the traditional VDI environment or virtual tops and desktops, this would typically be what a customer would deploy in. And every one of these blue boxes is typically a server. In some cases, there's probably multiple servers for each of these roles for redundancy. It needs to really be obviously an enterprise deployment. As you move to a VDI environment, you can't say, well, sorry, your desktops are all down because we only have a single point of failure. So you really need an enterprise type deploy. And you can see there's quite a lot to manage here. And so Citrix understood that this was actually a challenge for organizations, and they developed their Citrix DaaS offering. And so you can see what has happened is everything that's in the green box, all that infrastructure is now completely managed by Citrix. You don't have to worry about your databases. You don't have to patch the Windows OS that these reside on. You don't have to worry about licensing. You're not worried about storefront or director. All of these things basically become part of the Citrix Cloud service, delivering desktop as a service. So what that lets organizations do is really just worry about where is their data and what is that sort of location or that resource location that they want to deploy to. In this example, there's one resource location, which might be an on-premise, but a customer could have multiple resource locations. So say they had a DR site, they could effectively drop some cloud connectors in there, and then all they have to worry about is the virtual desktop server VDAs and desktop VDAs that the users connect to, and and that customer has now enabled that sort of workflow from whatever resource location they choose to use. So it dramatically simplifies sort of the operations and management, as well as for those organizations who maybe have looked at Citrix in the past and found it quite sort of a challenge to think about all the infrastructure they would have to deploy to get up and running. Now it's dramatically simplified. This cloud connector is effectively like a 5-minute deploy on top of a Windows server, and you're up and running with a new resource location. So Citrix DaaS delivers a comprehensive solution that addresses multiple use cases. So in the past, they would call this FlexCast for those of you coming from the old days. But really what this diagram is showing is that whether you're doing published apps or SaaS applications or VDI desktops or maybe Linux desktops, or even letting people access their own physical PC, that same Citrix DaaS infrastructure cloud service enables that. And so what organizations need to remember is that VDI often isn't a one size fits all. If you're going to do it cost effectively and it sort of deliver a good user experience, you really need to tailor what sort of scenarios you deploy to the different use cases and user groups in your environment. And so Citrix DaaS addresses all of those. So you're not forced to maybe try and fit someone into a use case that's not really a great fit. The other place Citrix DaaS really shines is it's completely agnostic in terms of where those resource locations reside. We talked about how easy it is to drop a cloud connector and basically enable a new resource location. And you can see in this diagram that Citrix DaaS can roll up multiple resource locations, whether it be Azure or AWS, or maybe it's an on-premise data center. What this really lets organizations do is have a choice in where they decide to keep their data repositories, because we got to remember the golden rule is to always have your virtual desktops next to your data to give that really good user experience. So now you're not pigeonholed into like a solution that may be only Azure centric, or a solution that only allows you to deploy on premise. Citrix DaaS effectively lets you leverage any of these. And I have organizations who primarily leverage maybe an on premise for their day-to-day production, but then they leverage Windows Azure for their DR location. And it's all managed from a single platform, and it's all sort of easy and streamlined to operate because you're not jumping into multiple infrastructures with multiple consoles. It's all unified. And so this one's a little bit of a busy slide, so I'm not going to talk about every item on it, but really Citrix Cloud is enterprise ready. And this is another key sort of differentiator. These are all the different pieces that are included with your Citrix Cloud subscription. A couple of them are add-on licenses around the sort of the SaaS offering and so on, but effectively you get that unified portal, you get that remote access. We're going to talk about Citrix Monitor in a little bit. Some of the provisioning tools, which really dramatically simplify the operations. So with Citrix, you really want to try and do as sort of the least amount of effort for the most amount of users. And so gold image management is key. You want to deploy an application once and make that available for thousands of users. You want to patch a Windows OS once and make that OS available for thousands of users. All of the tools and technology that Citrix rolls into its product dramatically simplify that total cost of ownership and improve the stability and resiliency of the environment. And we'll dive into some of the other features a little bit more. The other thing, obviously, this is all a cloud service now. So this is a unified management that this is what it looks like when you log into citrix.cloud.com. All your tools and all your sort of technologies are available from a single portal. Citrix Monitor. This is one of the key pieces of the DaaS offering, and it really lets you support your users. So a lot of people might maybe do RDP, or even if you're doing VPN, how do you know how well your users are performing? How do you make sure that they're having a good experience? How do you help them if they call in and say, hey, I'm having issues with this application? Are you now having to sort of one-off try and find how to connect to them and remotely assist them? Citrix Monitor brings this all into a unified portal. I can log in and see how busy my servers are. I can see how long logons are taking. I could log people off. I could reset their sessions. I can even go down and terminate a single hung application if I need to. So this is really where the enterprise level capabilities of Citrix start to separate itself. Integrated remote PC access. So this was a really interesting one, and I talk to Citrix customers routinely who don't even sort of know that this exists or it's possible. We had a major financial institution that, a part of their COVID response, they needed to get everyone home, and they needed to get everyone home as fast as they could. And one of the challenges was that they just didn't have the infrastructure in the data center to spin up 500 virtual desktops. So what they were able to do is deploy the Citrix software to the existing physical PCs that users use, and then they were able to securely deliver those just like a VDI desktop, but using the actual hardware and capabilities of that physical desktop. So security was happy because it still had all this the security wrapper and the security policies and posture that VDI was able to deliver, but this was connecting them to the existing remote PC. So the exact same applications, the exact same data that they might hopefully have not have been saving on their C drive, but probably do, all of that is the exact same. So this was an interesting use case, and this is included in your premium DaaS offerings. So don't forget about this use case for some of those scenarios where maybe they have a really expensive workspace or workstation that has a smoking GPU. Those users are often left behind in the work from home push. Citrix Remote PC can address those use cases. Another great feature that some Citrix customers may not be familiar with, but Citrix Workspace Environment Management. This is included in all versions of Citrix now, which is great. And what this really helps you do is eliminate a lot of this traditional sort of group policy and logon script to really drive down those logon times, as well as improve server scalability. Citrix Workspace Environment Manager can run sort of invisibly behind the scenes, and effectively it looks for any sort of idle resources, whether it be CPU or memory, and it can start claiming those back to make sure that the density that you get on your resources is optimized. And so this becomes a big deal, especially as you start to talk about clouds. Cloud sort of infrastructure where you're paying runtime, but it also is also critical, obviously, on-prem, where if you have infrastructure, you're going to try to make the most of it efficient in terms of efficiency, but also just to give good user experience. Because if you can improve the density, you're going to have happier users because there's going to be more resources for when those users require it. Autoscale, another big one, especially now that we're talking about cloud resources and spinning up VDI potentially in the cloud. Citrix has a very comprehensive autoscale technology where you may have said, well, I can script some of this, or I got a guy who can customize this for me, where Citrix brings this directly into their tool set, and you can have thresholds and set how much free capacity. You can do scheduling based on time of day. Very comprehensive tool set that really lets you make sure that the resources are there when your users need it, but that you're not really spending a penny more because you're basically spinning down resources as users drop off or non-peak times. So again, it's a critical piece of the puzzle as you start to talk about deploying in cloud resource locations. And it's all right there. It's all included in Citrix. So for those of you who are running Citrix today and you're sort of saying, okay, this all sounds great. I know Citrix has talked to me in the past, but like I've got a big Citrix environment. I just really can't fathom the idea of starting to reconfigure all of this stuff in the cloud. Citrix has come out with the automated configuration tool. And so what this does is it basically lets you take your configuration and port it to the cloud. And it's something that I've worked with a couple organizations already doing, and it's quite a comprehensive tool set. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to talk more about it. But really, it lets you not reinvent the wheel and port your config to the Citrix Cloud service so that you can get up and running as fast as possible. All right, and then one more poll. So this is kind of obviously following along in terms of our work from home poll. How confident are you guys in the security of your remote work implementation? So I'll take a second to answer the poll. Okay. Yeah, so we're almost 15 to 20% scared to death, which is concerning. But yeah, it's kind of what I expected. There's obviously room for improvement for over half of you. 30% are you feeling quite confident in your solution? That's really good. Hopefully, you guys are the VDI customers. And so, obviously, security is key in this day and age. As we start to let people work from home, um, we don't have the luxury anymore of knowing that they're in a secured sort of local area network where we're on a secured device that corporate owned and pushed policies. It's one of the things that is going to be one of the most concerning as we have this sort of hybrid work environment where we try to like security is often the enemy of flexibility, but Citrix really can address that and let your security team sleep at night while making those users happy. So one of the key things that Citrix brings to the play is their granular policy controls. So what this means is that you can turn these features on and off, and not just on and off for everyone in the organization, on and off at a granular level. So if you don't have users who need printing, maybe don't give printers, but maybe you have a specific user group that does, so they can be explicitly assigned printing. Maybe you want to allow clipboard, but only inbound so that people can't start exfiltrating data via the clipboard. We saw some of the watermarking. All of these things are available like with a very easy user interface that's a granular AD based sort of construct that you can assign based on what your use cases are. So it's not trying to make the organization fit to what the tool can do. It's really what making the tool do what the organization requires. Citrix session recording. This was a really interesting one. I did some work for a major gambling organization that basically needed the capability to audit contractors as they came in and worked on these critical systems. And so Citrix session recording basically lets you record what your users are doing in an ICA or a Citrix session and play it back like a movie. The nice thing is it has lots of policy controls, so you can say, hey, I only want to do it for this group of users, or I only want to do it if they access this application. So it doesn't have to be again on for everyone. Maybe it's only for your secure HR applications or your specific compliance and auditing requirements. So it's a really cool feature. And yeah, now it's included in all editions. So this was a nice bonus. We saw the watermarking in the example. So this is another one that traditionally Citrix was great at potentially maybe locking down like downloads and clipboard. But what happens if someone was going to start taking screenshots or maybe videotaping their session? Now with a watermark, you can effectively know exactly who that user was, what machine they were on. And again, you can customize that so that it's only for a handful of users or only when they access that critical app. And then again, this watermarking is not just for published applications or desktops or traditional sort of Citrix use cases, but now this can be overlaid on your SaaS applications, which quite likely is not a feature that your SaaS provider includes out of the box. App protection. This is another cool feature too. So potentially, if you have extreme security and you're like, hey, I don't even want people to be able to like run an application where they might have a keylogger installed remotely, or maybe they like the watermark is not even enough. You can actually have applications run in the Citrix Workspace client where it effectively black out the screen anytime a screenshot is initiated, or potentially any keylogging software. It will actually scramble the keys as it's being sent to the application so that any keylogger will actually not even see the real keystrokes. So Citrix is always taking that security to the next level for those organizations that need it. So now we're into the Citrix Analytics. This is where Citrix really provides the visibility that organizations need to support this sort of hybrid workforce. And so there's two main components to the Citrix Analytics. One of them is the security analytics, and that's really understanding what your threat sort of score is in terms of your users. And then the other one is performance analytics, and really understanding how well is this environment performing from my end user's perspective. So we'll talk a little bit about the security analytics. What it basically does is it's continuously monitoring as users sign in and use these resources through Citrix Cloud. It basically will give people scores, and then based on those scores, you can have policies that do a variety of actions, whether it maybe just add them to a watch list, maybe log the user out and lock them out of any Citrix resources, maybe send a notification to an administrator. It can do things based on geo mapping, or sort of when they log in from two locations, impossible log on, where they basically travel halfway around the globe within 1 minute. All of these things get flagged by the security analytics and give that sort of visibility to the security team, as well as actionable items that can be automated to sort of proactively address these security risks. The next one is the security analytics for performance. So this is effectively taking what sort of Citrix Monitor can do, but expanding it beyond those capabilities, and really giving you the ability to understand, how is my user experience being sort of scored across the board? What are my users like historical scores, so I can see if there's a trend where maybe my user experience is starting to degrade because of login time, or maybe I'm having network concerns where my latency is actually spiking and I'm starting to see sort of a systemic issue. I can see if there's a black hole server that is, sessions are being sent to a server that's maybe not functioning correctly, and I can quickly address that and make sure that it's not proving to be a challenge. So it really gives that visibility, that as an enterprise, you're trying to provide the best user experience possible, and it extends that and makes that possible for your IT administration. And then a lot of organizations, I find they also like the KPIs to report to management. Again, with a remote workforce, it's sometimes challenging to understand how well are things working for those users at home. Maybe they're not calling the help desk, but with this tool, you can see and you can proactively go out and reach out to Johnny and say, hey, like, I notice you're suffering compared to our other users. Let's talk about what's going on. Is Citrix being a challenge for you? And you can really proactively start to assist those users. So in summary, really, what are the value add that Citrix Desktop as a Service brings? Obviously, bringing the whole infrastructure into a cloud service streamlines the management and operations. The ability for Citrix to support really any platform, whether it be multi-cloud or on-premise. The automated tool sets that streamline the provisioning, so you can do simplified app management or image management, the monitoring, workspace environment management, which is going to let you get the density that you really need on cloud platforms, the auto scale, so you can spin up and spin down as needed. All of these from the management and sort of control plane. Then the user experience. Obviously, like Citrix is always a leader in delivering sort of the best user experience possible. It continues to expand on that. There's always new developments. Some of the things we might not have talked about today, even the adaptive audio. As people move to a hybrid workforce, audio and the ability to communicate with our peers becomes critical. Being able to offload teams to the endpoint to give that good user experience. All of these technologies sort of come to Citrix first. And then obviously security, it has to be secure in this multi-cloud, multi sort of resource, multi-application world. Citrix lets you put that wrapper around all your applications, whether they be SaaS-based, traditional client-server applications, or maybe full VDI desktops. That security and control boundary that lets you wrap everything and then provide that all through that unified portal. All of these features combine to really let that IT organization sleep at night and give those users a great user experience as they move to sort of this new world of work. So where does QuadBridge fit in? Me and my team, we maintain sort of our expertise in all the latest certifications on Citrix Cloud. We've done this for multiple organizations across multiple industries and thousands of seats. Where we can help out is if you're looking to move to Citrix Cloud, or if potentially Citrix Traditional, we can help with the design and planning and implementation on that. If you're a Citrix customer today and you're looking to move to Citrix Cloud, we can help expedite that and really make sure that you don't fall into any of the traps or concerns that might hold up your migration. Potentially, you're a Citrix customer and you're struggling and you're starting to see logon times are starting to slip, or you're finding image management is challenging, we can proactively do health checks, quarterly reports. I have customers that I do roadmap sessions where they look at what are the new features that Citrix are bringing, or they may have new use cases within the organization. How can we expedite and address those use cases to drive the most value out of the investment with Citrix? Potentially, you need to augment your IT team. You're looking for a Citrix SME, but you don't have one in-house. We could help with that. Potentially, just network operations or monitoring and escalation, we can also help with that. So definitely reach out to us if you have any need or any sort of scenarios that we can help out with, and we can definitely address those. And with that, we can jump into some Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Terry. I'll give you a chance to drink some water there, and we'll get things started. So
yeah, hopefully it wasn't too fast.
No, did great for time.
Good.
We'll get things started. I got some questions here, so thank you everyone for asking some questions here. I feel like some questions may have been answered already as we were going through the session. So, question from Raul is, Terry, VDI projects seem to be relatively complicated. Do you find that the integration often goes as planned or hit the timelines that are projected?
Typically, like for my projects, we set a reasonable sort of scope that I think it's depending what your expectations would be. There is some planning around VDI to make sure it's a successful project. I would say typically my projects don't run long. The biggest key is understanding what are your use cases and what are the applications and sort of what do your users need to do their job. That's the starting point of any successful VDI project. You don't want to start with the just spinning up a desktop and being like, hey, look, I got a VDI desktop. You really need to understand what are my users trying to do, and then build out the solution and address those needs. And then you'll have a successful VDI project. Hopefully that helps.
Awesome. Another question that we got here is the experience the same on Mac OS and Windows PC?
Yeah, and that's the beauty of this is the Citrix Workspace client effectively is identical on all the different platforms and gives that same user experience sort of regardless of what device that user is using.
Perfect. So, question from George is, so we're mostly SaaS for our business applications, CRM, finance, marketing, and operations. What enhancements or benefits would VDI give us?
So if you're strictly 100% SaaS, what you would be looking at is more of the secure private access solution that Citrix has developed. And so SaaS applications often don't have the security controls that an organization needs. So how do you make sure that people aren't sort of exfiltrating large amounts of data? Or we talked about the watermarking capability or their screenshotting. So Citrix brings the secure private access to bring that security wrapper that you can then apply to SaaS applications in the same way that Citrix has brought that security wrapper to traditional applications. So it basically lets that security boundary occur around your SaaS applications, as well as unifying all your SaaS applications into a single portal and providing single sign-on so that users don't have to remember a bunch of discrete passwords or whatnot.
Awesome. Loving the question, everyone here. So, how long could it take to get up and running for planning to deliver, given the optimal environment that we're at right now?
So that's the beauty with Citrix Cloud is it really has driven down that initial, oh my gosh, there's quite a few things to deploy and get up and running to do a proof of concept. Citrix Cloud, you could literally be up and running in a day and trying things out in a proof of concept scenario. Again, what I recommend for a VDI sort of, or like an ideal VDI implementation is really first understanding those use cases and understand what are my user groups that would most benefit from VDI, and typically you want to target that initial group who's going to benefit the most and really get you familiar with it and address those first, and then maybe move on to address some of those other FlexCast use cases. But it's not as it's not challenging in terms of infrastructure anymore because everything is moved to the cloud from a control plane. It's really just a matter now of deciding, well, what are my apps and what am I trying to let my users do? So it's dramatically lower with Citrix Desktop as a Service.
Awesome. I got another question here I got a question from Joey. So what are the preliminary steps and analysis needed to start the process to working with Citrix and VDI?
So it's kind of a similar theme here. The starting point would be really understanding what is the user group or user groups that I want to address. What are the applications that they need to do their job, and then building out a sort of a technical design that would meet those use cases. Does that make sense? Because
Perf-
it all starts with, again, like happy users equals happy project, right? It's if you give a user 80% of what they need to do their job, their VDI project is going to fail miserably. You have to make sure that you address what your users need to do for 100% of their job.
Awesome. This will be like a two-parter question from Pitts here. So uh,
Okay.
I'll give you the first one here. So Citrix doesn't have a link to AD specifically to Linux LDAP server. Will that be fine?
That I would probably need to know more about. I'm not sure. Like Citrix does tie to AD, but I've always used sort of Microsoft Active Directory domain controllers. So maybe there's something technical there that I haven't seen, and we could maybe follow up with that specifically. But it sounds like this is the two-parter, so let's hear the second part.
Well, so the second question is, does Citrix desktop have to be Windows, Windows only, or is Linux an option?
So yeah, Linux is fully supported. There is what they call a virtual desktop agent, a VDA. Have referred to it a couple times. So VDA is basically the software you would deploy on your Linux machine, and then that can remote desktops and applications just like a Windows machine could.
I'm gonna uh, I'm gonna bring Pitts also because he got another question here, so I'll continue with that, and then I'll get to the question Paul asked here. So, what's the expected cost for VDI on Citrix Cloud?
It's so broad that I would say really that one we would want to talk about it after and understand like what your use cases are. There's different sort of feature sets potentially what you're looking to do, as well as if you want to include sort of the hardware cost or if you're going to go with cloud provider. It's really a bigger discussion, and so I would say that would be something. Let's reach out and we can talk about it face to face.
Awesome. So, question from Paul here is, what are the biggest mistakes customers make during VDI deployment?
So definitely one of the biggest ones would be not addressing 100% of what the user needs to do. Too often I see that like a customer might think that it's okay to, like I said, have 8 out of 10 apps that they need, but you're just not going to have success in that. The other one is not addressing or really sizing the environment appropriately. You basically can't expect to take someone off a smoking fast laptop and then put them in a Windows 10 machine that has 4 gig of RAM and 2 CPU and expect them to have a great experience. So really understanding what your users require to do their job and sizing it appropriately, as well as making sure that you understand where the different use case models can apply. So it's maybe a little bit beyond, but we talked a bit about how you might deliver published applications versus published desktops. To have a successful project, you really are looking for the most efficient model to deliver what your users need to do. So giving someone a full-blown desktop when they only need to run one application might not be the best use of resources or spending.
I think I can answer this next question. Will we be getting a copy of this recording? Yes, you will. There will be a shared copy of this whole session, so you can pull it up when anytime there. So we'll go to the next question here from Jason. Citrus Desktop could it be multi-screen?
Yeah, yeah. So Citrix can support like I think it's up to 8 monitors or something ridiculous. They like again are like the leaders in sort of user experience. One of the really cool things they even support nowadays is if you have one of these really ridiculously sized high resolution monitors, you can virtually slice your display so it acts as potentially 6 independent monitors or whatnot. So full support of all those different types of rich high DPI monitor scenarios.
Awesome. So So Terry, what are the differences and benefits between cloud VDI deployment and on-prem VDI deployment? Is there performance and cost difference?
So the golden rules with any kind of VDI is that you always want to put your virtual desktops next to your applications and data. So if you have a huge ERP application that might be legacy and it's all on-prem, your best placement for your virtual desktops or your potentially your virtual apps that are delivering that would be in that same data center where that backend resources and um, infrastructure lies. Whether you decide, like say you don't have that dependency and you've got sort of um, data data can move where the VDAs are going to reside, it's going to become down to a question of what kind of scalability you need, the economies of scale in terms of on-premise versus cloud. It's really that it's nothing to do from a VDI perspective. It's the age-old question, like, is it cheaper to build a data center or leverage a cloud one, right? So the VDI discussion just sort of sits on top of that discussion. It's not there's not one size fits all. It's really, again, like start with where does my data and applications reside. That's where you would probably want to start. And then if you're like a greenfield environment where you've got no infrastructure, then it becomes a cost calculation of what would it take for me to spin up in the cloud? Do I like the scalability of spinning up and spinning down, which the cloud brings? Or do I want to go on-prem because it's going to be fairly static and maybe I can drive that at a cheaper price? So it's not one size fits all, but start with where your applications and data reside, and then really it becomes a discussion beyond that.
Thank you. So really good question from Jeff here. So I work for an engineering firm with heavy CPU and GPU needs. How
Sure.
do some of the deployments you've done handle latency when the user's looking for a complex model, etc.? Namely, time between the movement of the user's mouse and the reaction of their screen.
Yeah, and so ultimately, like latency, it's going to be a fixed sort of value. And so, depending on what kind of latency you're talking about, Citrix performs quite well. Depending, like I would say, continentally for sure. It depends what your users are doing and what kind of level of sort of response. Like, are you talking like video game level response or just sort of manipulating a model? But ultimately, Citrix has all the HDX policy controls that we talked a little bit about. So you can do things such as driving down maybe the um, color bits per or the what do you call it, the color pixel depth, or maybe you can adjust the resolution, or maybe you can make sure that you turn off other things that are unnecessary to drive down some of that environment. But obviously you're going to want to make sure that you size your GPU resources appropriately. But in terms of latency itself, that's going to be dependent on what the user's connection is. And if you have a user who's coming in at 300 milliseconds of latency and dropping packets, that's going to be something that you want to look at from the network perspective more so than from the GPU or VDI infrastructure perspective.
Terry, you're on
Okay.
fire, man. Awesome. Thank you. Um, I got a question here from Jim. Can you migrate an on-premise storefront to the cloud and keep the same configuration settings, add authentication, same URLs, etc.?
Yeah, so Citrix Cloud does not require you to use their workspace. So you could definitely migrate and host your own storefront in the cloud. I have organizations who do that, who effectively, for those of you who are sort of versed in the Citrix terminology, they basically own their access layers. So they're using cloud for their infrastructure and backend database and so on, but they're using their own access layers. So they use their own storefronts and they host those themselves. For this customer, they do it in Azure. So you could totally migrate your storefront and maintain that config if you prefer that.
Thank you. And so, question from Alex here. So, in a personal device world where users are providing their own laptops, MacBooks, etc., all they would really need is a workplace application. Is that right?
Correct. And they technically don't even need that. Citrix fully supports an HTML5 embedded client. And so you could even go that far. Personally, I recommend the workspace client. It just makes for a little bit of a richer experience. And the nice thing is when a user logs in, it's one of those sort of it's I don't want to say it's foolproof because people can mess it up, but it's basically foolproof where it says, "Hey, you don't have the Citrix client. Click here to download," and they're up and running. So it's really easy to onboard users that they would basically just be told, "Yeah, you got to go to quadbridge.cloud.com," and up it comes.
So follow up with that. When does authentication take place? Do they sign into the workplace or do they sign in when they connect to the desktop or application?
So they should sign in when they hit the workspace. So when they first hit that browser page, it basically it's going to present like a username and password potentially, but Citrix is really good at supporting all your major sort of authentication providers. It fully supports SAML. So for example, at Quadbridge, we're completely Azure AD based. So if I go to my Citrix portal, it kicks me over and tries to authenticate me against Azure AD. I might already be authenticated against Azure AD, in which case I don't even have to authenticate, and up pop my applications and desktops, and there's no further authentication required. So it's a really great user experience in terms of single sign-on, but Citrix can support a variety. And so if you're not doing any sort of integration with the third-party authentication, you might just have a username and password prompt when you hit that workspace portal.
Awesome. I'll throw in a few more questions before we get to time here. So, question from Alex here is, how long could it take to get up and running from planning to delivery in an optimal environment?
Again, it really depends on what your sort of breadth of the or the scope of that project would be. Like I said, you can be up and running and kicking the tires on a Citrix Cloud environment in a day. Whether you're trying to roll this out for 1,000 users and be fully tested for production, I would say that's going to take a little longer. So it really depends, and I'd be happy to chat further on like what you had in mind in terms of scope to give you an idea.
Awesome. Um, Question from George, but I feel like we already answered that, so I think we're good there. But you know, I just want to say, first of all, Terry, thank you so much. Rapid fire, you answered everything. I thought
Appreciate
I
it.
thought I thought we'll have some folks here who would be ready to stump you, but you're always 10 steps ahead. So thank you so much for this. Thank you for everyone joining. But before we wrap up, we are doing a giveaway where we did select at random one of our attendings here to win a prize. So I did already do the selection here. Just gonna pull up the name. I should have had this ready. 2 seconds. We'll have a little virtual drum roll here. Oh, perfect. So our giveaway for the Google Nest Audio will be for Pitts Brent. So congratulations. Congratulations, Pitts. Thank you for also the questions from everyone as well. I hope this was a very, very informative session. Terry's one phone call away for all your questions. Reach out. And again, thank you for everything and have yourself a great rest of the day. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, guys.